All righty. Good morning. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Hope everyone's doing well today. Good to see you. I know we have some folks that are visiting us for the first time. In fact, raise your hands if you're visiting us for the first time. Okay. Well, we hope that will not be the last time, and hopefully before the day's out, we'll get to meet you. I want to go to our Torah portion. And this is called, as I shared with you earlier, Shelach. You go out for yourself. And inferred in that is you go check things out for yourself. Of course, this is the Torah portion that deals with the spies going into the land to spy out the land. So we're going to begin to read in Numbers chapter 13, beginning at verse 1. And it feels like I'm forgetting something. I just have that nagging feeling that, Bill, there's something you're forgetting here. Well, that too, but I'm sure Beth will remind me later. Anyway, Numbers chapter 13, verse 1. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Shelach lecha, send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the children of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one a leader among them. And so Moses sent them from the wilderness of Paran according to the command of the Lord, all of them men who were of the heads of the children of Israel. Just a couple of things just to establish some context. It is my understanding that this particular event occurred about 2 years after Israel had left Egypt, meaning that 2 years into their journey, they were poised to go over into the land. We should also point out that the spies were sent into the land to see how to take the land, not to determine whether or not they should take the land. How, not if. And that's a very important thing because we receive instructions. Do this, don't do that. And we might deliberate on how, but we should never deliberate on if. If he said do this, then he means do this. If he says, I don't want you to do that, then he means don't do that. And we understand the consequences of failing to acknowledge these things and to do them. So again, they were sent in to see how, not if they were to do it. Now, we use the word spy a lot, but the Hebrew word actually is tur. And I don't know that I told you to, you did do that. Thank you, Jonathan. Tur, tav vav resh. That's the Hebrew word that we translate as spy, which I find very interesting because they were going in and taking a tour of the land. They were tourists. It's just that the tourists were going to take over. That was the idea. So they're going in to tour the land, once again, to see how to take the land, not necessarily to see whether or not they were to do it. And maybe they were investigating the timing of these things, what's the best route, all of those kinds of things. But my point here is that originally it was never God's intention that Israel traversed the wilderness for 40 years. That came as a consequence of them deciding if they should go into the land, rather how they were to do it. Now, Moses sends these different leaders, people that he trusted or whom the people trusted, people that were respected in their tribe. And among those 12 that he sent were, of course, Hoshea, initially as he's known. We know him as Joshua, Yehoshua, the son of Nun, not the son of Nun. By the way, that's just a pet peeve of mine. He's not Joshua, the son of Nun. He's Joshua, the son of Nun. Okay? Because Nun just doesn't. Not only is it a mispronunciation, but it just the son of Nun. That just doesn't sound right to me. Anyway, Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb. Because these two, as we understand, these are the ones who actually believed God when he said, you're going to go in, you can possess the land, etc. And so these 12 tourists go into the land to see how they're going to take the land. They come back, they bring fruits of the land, they bring back the report. It's just like Moses said, it's a land flowing with milk and honey. They brought back a cluster of grapes from Eshcol. And by the way, I've been to Eshcol and I have tasted the grapes there. And they're still pretty doggone big. I mean, we're eating grapes like this from Eshcol. Anyway, But when they're coming back and bringing this report, bringing the fruit of the land, yeah, Moses said it was a land flowing with milk and honey. We can testify to that. However, there is something in the land that Moses didn't tell you about. He kind of left you in the dark about, and that is that there were people that made us look like insects or grasshoppers in their sight. And so two things come to mind here. Number one, when the Father has sent you on, when the Father sent you out on this journey, how many of the things that you have gone through did he tell you about in advance? Noon. I mean, we heard, that it's a straight gate and it's a narrow way, but we were just, everything's going to be all right. But again, the point is, he doesn't really tell us everything. We are on a need-to-know basis. Because a lot of these things that we encounter are designed and engineered to do what? To provoke us to live a life of faith, to trust him, to have confidence in him. So these spies or these tourists, they brought back a report on these other aspects of the whole. You love me, don't you? Thank you. But when they brought back these reports, they didn't bring it directly to Moses, the Bible says. They brought it to Moses and they brought it to all of the people. So let's read in verse 26. Now they departed and came back to Moses and Aaron and all the congregation of the children of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back word to them and to all the congregation. They showed them the fruit of the land, and then they told him and said, we went to the land where you sent us. It truly flows with milk and honey, and this is the fruit. Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south. The Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites, they dwell in the mountains. And the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the banks of the Jordan. And so as the narrative continues in our Torah portion, these leaders, instead of accentuating the positive, they begin to point out the negative, which is our nature, unfortunately. We tend to point out the things that we don't have, that we can't do, that are too difficult, rather than those things that we can do, the things he has promised, the things that he has given us. But in doing this, and this is the most important part, I think anyhow, as a result of their report, the people of God lost confidence. They lost faith in God. They lost their willingness to go in and to fight for the land. And we have to keep in mind, something we've shared many times before, possessing the land that was given to them is equivalent to functioning in your purpose. They were not a people designed to wander in the wilderness. They were a people that were called to live in the land of Canaan and to live according to the instructions that he had given them as a light to the nations that surrounded them. So again, possessing the land of Canaan, living, dwelling there, living the way he told them to live in the land is equivalent to functioning in your purpose. And so what were they really saying? When they brought this evil report, and the people lost faith and confidence in God, and we can't do this, they're too large, their cities are too fortified, we can't do this. What they were essentially saying is, we can't or won't function in our purpose. And if you don't function in your purpose, what good are you? Salt that loses its saltiness is what? Tossed into the street, is trampled underfoot. Why? Because Yeshua said it's good for nothing. All right? A fig tree that doesn't bear figs, what good is it? It's going to wither up, dry up, and it's going to die. So functioning in your purpose is very important. And they were essentially saying, we can't do that, or we won't do that. And of course, this was a turning point for that particular generation, because these are the people that, most of them anyway, had been born in slavery. and were ignoring the call to be a free people under God's sovereignty. They were still living with the mindset of being under Pharaoh's sovereignty. So these are the people that consequently, because of their choices, not God's, but because of their choices, they were destined to die in the wilderness. And so the conquest of the land was delayed 38 years. And so negative, evil reports can delay, not destroy, mind you, but can delay God's purposes. And so what we say and how we interact with one another is very important. It will be those who were born in the wilderness. They will be the ones who would conquer the land of Canaan. And so what happened? These people, 10 of them anyway, they were overwhelmed by what they saw in the land. Their message was, even though it's a great place, we can't possess it. It's just too much for us. We can't do it. Of course, Caleb, who was of a different spirit when this report was being given to the congregation, he rose up. He tried to silence the people who were given the evil report, only to be silenced himself. Numbers chapter 13, verse 30. Then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, "Let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it." But the men who had gone up with him said, "We are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we." And they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, "The land through which we have gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants. And all the people whom we saw in it are men of great stature. There we saw the giants, the descendants of Anak came from the giants, and we were like grasshoppers in our own sight." In our own sight, that's how we saw ourselves, as grasshoppers. It doesn't say that initially that this is what they told us they saw us as. This is what we saw ourselves as. And so we were in their sight. And so the people listened to this majority report, and they believed that even though God had promised that he would go before them, that he would be with them through the whole thing, that he would help them, they decided to believe that the people of Canaan were stronger. Now this is on the heels of what happened at Passover, the plagues that led up to the events of Passover. This is on the heels of seeing a sea being split in two and waters being congealed in their midst to form walls on their right and the left so they can go through on dry land, and all of the things that have happened. Even though they've witnessed all these things, what they're seeing in front of them is too overwhelming. And so this evil report is like a cancerous cell. Unchallenged, what does it do? It devours and it spreads. And this is what happened to the camp of Israel. In fact, the Hebrew word that is translated evil report literally means slander. So it is understood that they slandered the land, claiming that the land devoured its inhabitants. And the reality is, and the irony is, that their evil report is what devoured the people of God. Proverbs chapter 10, verse 18 says that whoever spreads slander is a fool. So that's not a good thing. This particular slander infected the entire assembly, and it affected the entire assembly, because the people apparently were sitting on ready to go back. We can't do this. So we understand that slander, gossip, rumors, these kinds of things, it is kryptonite to God's people. Because unfortunately, we have a history of allowing it to spread. And this is what happened. And the danger of it, or the specific danger in this is, it has a tendency to undermine God's purposes for his people. Again, in this particular case, it delayed going into the land by 38 years, so that an entire generation died in the wilderness. Now, what made the report evil? And I ask that question because what they reported was accurate. There were giants in the land. There were fortified cities that were strong. That was true. That was accurate. So what made it an evil report is because it serve to convince others that we can't do what God told us we should do and that we can do. So the sin of the 10 spies was more than just saying they couldn't take the land. It was because they convinced others that the land could not be taken. They instilled their own fear and their own unbelief in other people, and then that propagated throughout the camp. So it's one thing for me to have doubts and uncertainties and maybe struggle, but when I set out to infect you with that, that's a whole another thing entirely. You know, the old saying is misery loves company. And unfortunately, we give into that thing from time to time. However, we shouldn't. You know, if we have doubts, and we all do from time to time, we have uncertainty, we all have fears from time to time, that's one thing. We need to deal with those things. We need to overcome those things. And we may struggle in those things from time to time. But let's be very, 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 very careful that we do not infect others with our fear, our doubt, and our uncertainty. Are you saying that I can't share my burdens with my brother? I'm not saying that at all. But I think everybody knows exactly what I mean here. It's one thing to go to somebody, help me pray about this, I'm struggling with this, and let me go and infect you with my fear, my doubt, my uncertainty, the slander aspect of what's being described for us here. Because they instilled fear and unbelief in all of the other people, to the point that the people considered it would have been better if they had died in Egypt rather than to come out into this wilderness and die. God brought us out into this wilderness to kill us and our children. That was their response. And so he basically said, well, I'll show you. You'll die in this wilderness, but your children will possess the land. They'll do what you were supposed to do. So again, the spies allowed their doubts to infect an entire nation, and in so doing, they altered history. Think of it that way. They altered history because they were just so overwhelmed by fear that they found it necessary to infect others with their own fear. And so the 10 men that did this, they prevented a generation from fulfilling their God-ordained purpose. So I know that everybody knows this, but I'm wanting you to think about this maybe in a way you haven't considered, that an entire generation can be affected by the words that come out of my mouth. Death and life are in the power of the tongue, right? So these are people who chose to live by sight and not by hearing. They feared what they had seen in the land, and they believed that what they had seen was more powerful, more threatening, more awesome, more fearful than what God had spoken to them. And so the giants and the fortified cities made a bigger impact on them than what the Word of God was. That is something we all, I'm afraid to admit, but we all deal with from time to time. We know what God has said. We know what God has done. We know what He can do. We know what He will do. And yet, when we're faced with circumstances and consequences, starting with me, we typically kind of, at least for a little bit, we give into that, we're overwhelmed by that, and we're, in some cases can be struck with fear and doubt and uncertainty. But we need to remember that in the human body, our center of balance is not here. It's in here. It's in our ear. How do we know that? When we get an ear infection, we struggle to stand up straight, to walk upright. And so He has designed it within our bodies to remind us that your center of balance is not by what you see, it's by what you hear. Because faith comes by hearing, and hearing by. How many times did Yeshua say, to he who hath an eye, let him see? Compared to how many times He said, to he who has an ear, let him hear. Every week when we get together, what do we do collectively? Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. And so then again, if we're not hearing what God says and we're not heeding what God says, then it's going to be very difficult for us to stand upright and to walk straight as his people. And when we don't hear what he says and take it to heart, in spite of what we may see, then we drift, or we can. We can stumble, we can fall, or in Israel's case, we can wander about. But again, Israel was not a nation called to wander about the wilderness for 40 years. That was the consequence of not answering the call that he had given to them. Not desiring, not being willing to function in their purpose. And by the way, I know that a lot of people say, I don't know what my purpose is. Trying to figure that out. Hey, guess what? I am too. Seriously. You know, I think I'm seeing a little more clearly these days as this congregation, you know, develops, you know. But nonetheless, I'm still looking, I'm still searching, I'm still asking, I'm still pondering, you know. So fulfilling or functioning in one's purpose is going to be hard at times. If we're going to follow him, it's going to be the hardest thing we'll ever do. And so we shouldn't just, when circumstances say this is too hard or it's impossible, it's not clear, you know, we should not allow those things to say we can't do this. We have to keep trusting him. We have to keep putting one foot in front of the other, so to speak, and walk the path that he's given us as he gives us the light to see. And in time, if we'll be faithful to do that, he will bring us into the fullness of what he placed us here to do. Me, you, all of us. So then, it is very important that we do not refuse to function in that purpose. We must not do that. Because without a purpose, there really isn't a point. There's an existence, but there's not life. We're here for a reason. Again, a fig tree that doesn't produce figs, what good is it? So as a congregation, we must have a purpose. We believe we have a purpose. And it's not just to be something that exists until the next best thing comes along. Or the best thing comes along, whatever way you want to look at it. That's not why we're here as a congregation. That's not why he raises up any assembly, wherever they are. It is to serve a specific, important function according to his plan, according to his agenda. And so, understanding that, very important that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. That is, when somebody makes me mad, that's my cue to take my toys and go. Because that is our tendency as people. When something happens that I don't understand or don't like, that is not my cue to pack my bags and hit the road. Maybe it's your cue to go talk to that person and see if we can work this out and seeing that we're in, you know, a relationship with one another and a covenant with one another because we're in covenant with him. It's also important that in doing this that we learn not to fear man more than we fear God. The world's gone crazy out there. Have you noticed? Who hasn't noticed yet? Let me see your hands. And I'm not going to get political. I'm not. But there's some crazy people running this place. And if you stare at them too long, not only does it fill you with a sense of they're nuts, but they're dangerous. And that's where we have to watch out, because then that's when we can allow fear and doubt and uncertainty. And how's this all going to work out, God? Because I know what you said, but they're saying this. We have to be very, very careful not to get our eyes off of him and get them on men. Maybe, if this applies, maybe you should fast from the news. I've been fasting from the news for, I would say, probably close to a year now. Somebody approves. No, I have. I've been fasting from the news close to a year, and I can tell you that it's so much more peaceful. Well, Bill, you can't stick your head in the sand. I'm well aware that it's crazy out there. I'm well aware there's crazy folks out there. I'm just trying my best to do what I'm encouraging others to do, and to get my eyes off of all of that and get my eyes where they belong, to set my focus where it needs to be, because my life has been a lot more peaceful. He will keep them in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on him, right? So maybe it's necessary that we get our eyes off of men, the news, and everything else that would cause us to be troubled, to cause us to doubt, to fear, and to think we can't do what God has called us to do. Because if we focus so intently on what men or mankind is doing to the point that we neglect our calling, then I will suggest to you that we are, potentially anyway, repeating the sin of the 10 spies. When we give into fear, that might prevent us from fulfilling our purpose. But when we begin to spread that fear and doubt and discontentedness and whatever it is, then we're bringing everybody else in on that too, and we're undermining what God has purposed for them. We're robbing them of their courage. As I've shared with you many times, we are to encourage someone, right? We're to encourage one another. And if we're encouraging one another, that means we're sharing our courage with that other person. And if we're sharing our courage with that other person, that means we should have courage. Anyway. Couldn't resist. Courage. Anyway. I'm sorry. When we discourage one another, what are we doing? We're taking courage away from that person. We're robbing them of that courage. So it's crazy out there. We're living in perilous times. There are giants out there. There are fortified cities. And I'll take 60 seconds to say that when I say there are giants out there, I mean giants just like there were in the Bible. But not people of great physical stature, but people who have great power, in influence, authority, and they're using that power, influence, and authority to negatively impact your life, particularly the people of God, particularly the people who want to live according to his instructions and live life in a way that pleases him. They are here, and quite frankly, most of them are concentrated in the big cities. I'm not saying it's exclusive to that, but it's certainly concentrated in that. And then it begins to boil over out into other areas until it affects and infects everywhere. So it's the same thing that was going on then is going on now. It may not look exactly like it looked then, but the function of it is, in my view anyway, identical. And so as we're facing these things, we cannot allow fear and doubt to take root in us. Again, to do so would cause us to, in some ways, function just as the 10 spies function and end up giving a slanderous report and infecting God's people with unbelief and doubt and fear and all these other things. So now, we are to encourage one another. To discourage our brethren as the spies did means, again, that we would be stealing their courage. And if we're discouraging people, that means that we didn't have any courage in the first place. So that brings us back to Caleb. Caleb said, we can do this right now, today. Let's do it. And what convinced him was not what he had seen, but what he had heard. In fact, he had heard through the mouth of Moses that we as God's people are not to fear our enemies. Let me read Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 6. Be strong and of good courage. Do not fear nor be afraid of them, for the Lord your God, he is the one who goes with you, and he will not leave you nor forsake you. And just to put an exclamation point on that, Yeshua said, I'm never going to leave you nor forsake you. I'm going to be with you wherever you go. I'm going to be with you right up until the end of the age. Now, either it's true or it's not. And if it's not true, we should all go home. But if it is true, then we need to garner courage, find courage, and then encourage one another to be strong and of good courage. Because what He's given us to do, we can do it because He's with us. He's going before us. I'm going to brag on Him a little bit here where this little congregation is concerned. He meets our needs before we know we have need of it. That doesn't happen because He's cobbled together the smartest people that are out there. I can guarantee you He has not done that. Not where this one is concerned anyway. But He meets our needs before we realize we have need of that. He goes before us. That's what I'm trying to impress upon you. He has been going before us already, and we trust that He will continue to do that. What we must do is to continue to place our confidence and our trust in Him and keep our eyes on Him and not get distracted by all of these other things that are going around. So it boils down to this: who are we going to fear more? The giants or the one who's told us to conquer the giants? Unfortunately, Israel of old thought, well, they're stronger than we are. And they feared that which they set their focus on. And I want to really underscore this point. We will fear what we revere. We will fear what we revere. So who do we fear more? Pharaoh or God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? You know, what's really ironic is the people of Israel, when they were so fearful of Pharaoh, didn't know, apparently at the time, that Pharaoh was fearful of them. He had said to his cabinet, they are more and mightier than we. I think I've shared this with you before. When the adversary starts thinking that God's people are more and mightier than he, that's when they go into conspiracy mode and they start doing things to dismantle and undermine and to put fear in our minds. But the reality is they are well aware that God's people are more and mightier than they. He feared Israel, but they considered Pharaoh to be almighty. And so there are several instances in Scripture where we see that Israel feared certain enemies. As it turns out, though, those enemies were living in fear of them. In fact, the Canaanites, it said, lived in fear of God's people from the day they heard the news that God had split the sea for them. Remember, Rahab told that to the spies who went into the city of Jericho. We've been waiting on you. Where have you been? We've been sitting here wondering when you were going to show up because we've been fearful of this day ever since we heard your God split the sea. That's the reality of the situation. Let me underscore it with Scripture. Deuteronomy chapter 2, verse 25. This day I will begin to put the dread and fear of you upon the nations under the whole heaven, who shall hear the report of you and shall tremble and be in anguish because of you. That's what God says of his people. Now, not because of us, but because of the God that is in the midst of his people, who goes before his people, who works in and through his people. There's nothing that frightens the adversary and the powers of darkness more than God's people who've got their eyes fixed on him, who are full of the Spirit of God, who are not afraid of the adversary, and who are going about his business, advancing his purposes and his agenda, because that's why he put us here. And so if he told them, I'm going to go before you, I'm going to be with you, don't be fearful of them, then it should be true today that we should believe that he goes before us, that he is with us, that he fights for us, he fights on our behalf, and he looks to see who's going to trust him and follow him into that battle. We are here to go forward, not run and hide in some corner, cowering because certain people might sign certain executive orders and do this, that, and the other. Or because some hacker might get into some oil pipeline's computer system or some beef whatever, all the different things that are going on. And we go, hey. Where the beef is concerned, our Father owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. All right. Did that come across as political? So who are we going to fear more? The Antichrist or the Christ? Black helicopters, FEMA camps, all these different conspiracy theories, Antifa, all these different things. Here's what Isaiah 8, verses 12 and 13 says. I'm not going to read it all for you. I'm going to paraphrase it. He says, you're listening to all these conspiracies? Don't be fearful of those things that they call conspiracy. If you're going to fear anything or anyone, fear me. If you're going to dread anything, let me be your dread. You need to keep your eyes fixed on me. And we know this. And yet, we all at times struggle with this. So we are to fear God and to fear Him alone. Because if we fear Him, we will pursue His purpose for us, for our family, for this congregation. And we will strive to function in our purpose and in a way that befits the identity that we've been given as His people, so that others will know that we are His people. And as such, not to be cowards and not to be intimidated. I'm not saying go out in the street with the spiritual billy club and, break knees and all that. I'm not saying that. I am saying that when we are placed in position to take a stand for what is true and what is holy and what is clean and what is righteous, then that is exactly what we should do. And it doesn't matter what laws they pass. It doesn't matter what edicts are sent out or executive orders are signed. If it conflicts with and transgresses with what we've already heard the sovereign of the universe say, then we're going to have to say, I can't help you. Can't help you, can't accommodate you. And not be fearful of what the consequences are where men are concerned. All right, so it's going to seem like we're turning a hard corner here and taking a turn to go in somewhere else. Trust me, we're not. But I want you to go to Numbers 15 now with me, in verse 38. Speak to the children of Israel. Tell them to make tassels or fringes on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and to put a blue thread in the tassels of the corners. And you shall have the tassel, that you may look upon it and remember all the commandments of the Lord and do them, and that you may not follow the harlotry to which your own heart and your own eyes are inclined, and that you may remember and do all my commandments and be holy for your God. And so this is the command concerning the tzitzit. I want you to see this Hebrew word. It's a fun word to try to pronounce. Some people trip all over it. I've heard zit. It has a visual I can't really deal with, But I've heard all kinds of things, but it's tzitzit. And these are the fringes that were upon the corners. And the Hebrew word could also be rendered hem, H-E-M, or wing. So it's placed upon the corners or the hem or the wings of their garment. Of course, this is referring to that which the woman who had the issue of blood, when she couldn't get to Yeshua, she just reached out and she grabbed the hem of his garment or the corner. So she was grabbing for the tzitzit that were in the corners of his garment. And then this commandment is applied to the development of the tallit or the prayer shawl, and so most of you have seen that. But it's really, the emphasis is not on the garment per se, where a tallit is concerned. It's what's on the corners or the wings of that garment. The four corners where the fringes are. And of course, what he told us here, it is to remind us of those things that we are to do. But it also implies this, that you and I as his people can take refuge under his wings. Think of Psalm 91, dwelling in the secret place of the Most High, abiding under the shadow of the Almighty, finding refuge under his wings, under his corners. And Malachi it says, to those who fear my name, the Son of Righteousness shall arise with healing in his wings. And the word that is translated there as wings is the same word that is translated corners, where the tzitzit are placed. So he arises with healing in his corners. Now think of the woman reaching out to grab the corner of his garment. But now let's look at something here that pertains to what we've been talking about. The purpose of looking on the tzitzit, the function, is to remember, let's use this word, to focus upon those instructions that we have been given, those things that we've heard from him that we are to do, or those things that we aren't to do. So we focus on the tzitzit so that we remember to do these things. We do what God is telling us to do by focusing on what he calls our attention to. Let me say it again in case you missed what I'm trying to get across here. He calls our attention to the corner of that garment where the tzitzit are. I want you to focus here. Because if you focus here, then you remember to do what I told you to do in spite of what is swirling around you and what everybody else may be telling you to do, or may be telling you you can't do, i.e. we can't take the land, there's giants and fortified cities. Without those fringes, we may forget who we are. It's kind of like an insignia almost. And so it serves as a reminder of who we are and how we should live. Now let me tie something in the New Testament to that concept. James chapter 1, verse 22. But be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man observing his natural face in a mirror. For he observes himself, goes away, and immediately forgets what kind of a man he was. But he who looks into the perfect law of liberty and continues in it, and is not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the work, this one will be blessed in what he does. So, pairing these two passages together, here's the message. We're reminded not to follow our own heart, not to do what is right in our own eyes, and consequently go our own way. Think of it like this. The heart and the eyes of the body are the body's spies. And depending on what they focus on, the giants and the fortified cities, or what God said, they can mislead you. Your eyes will lie to you. Your heart will lie to you if it's not fixed on him. You understand what I'm saying? Because from his youth, what is the heart of man like? I'm just trying to follow my heart, Bill. Well, be careful. Be careful. So again, the heart and eyes of the body spies, and if we're not careful, they'll lie to us. And they'll tell us that what we see is bigger than what we've heard him say. The spies report convinced Israel that they belonged in Egypt. They didn't belong in the land of Canaan. And so that would imply then that we don't need to identify as Israel. We're better suited to identify as Egyptians. Let's put it this way. When it's just getting too hard in this world, it's going to be really hard to identify as God's people, Israel, and all the responsibility that goes along with that. It might just be easier to go back to Egypt. Now, in the instruction about the tzitzit, it mentions a blue cord. In Hebrew, it's techelet. That's another interesting word to try to pronounce. Techelet. This is actually what we are to look upon. Not the other fringes necessarily, but the blue cord, the techelet, is what we're to really focus on. I do want to show you this Hebrew word. Thank you, Jonathan. This is an associated word or a family word to tzitzit. It's hatzitz. Hitzitz. And it means to peer on something, to look very intently on something. In this particular context, what we are to peer very intently upon, what we're to focus on, Beyond the other cords in the tzitzit is the blue cord, the one that is dyed from a mollusk that is supposedly found in the Mediterranean and only surfaces about every 70 years. Chilazon, I think's the name of it. But anyway, the blue of this mollusk, this dye it produces, is supposed to be some very, very unique shade of blue that is intended to remind us of the heavens where the Creator dwells. And so it reminds us of the Creator. That's the point. That the blue cord is to remind us of the Creator. But now in Judaism, because they are very uncertain of just what shade of blue this actually was, Orthodox Jews don't put a blue cord in their tzitzit. I think some of you knew that. Maybe some of you did not. In fact, many, many years ago, a friend of ours who owns a company that imports talitot and shofarot and these kinds of things, when he was discovering that there were these crazy Christians, is what he called them, who wanted to observe Sabbath and keep the feast and eat kosher and all these kinds of things, he said, I wonder if they're interested in shofars and talits. And so he began to import them. And so the talits that he was bringing over from Israel initially, none of them had the dechelet, the blue cord. And so he was getting confronted with, where's the blue cord? So he's trying to explain, we don't do this. And then he thought of it and said, maybe I can find somebody who put the blue cord there. So he started doing this. All right, anyway, that's maybe too much information. The point is that in Judaism, the Orthodox do not include the blue cord because of their uncertainty of the shade of blue and the mollusk from which it came. But here's my point. If the blue cord is the focal point, that's what we're really to gaze upon intently, to focus on, so that it will remind us to do what we've been told to do. If that's missing, can we truly be reminded to do what we've been told to do in a way that is going to be pleasing to the Father? I'm just throwing that question out there. Now, let's look at this Hebrew word. The Hebrew word that is translated as it referring to the blue cord. Aleph, Tav, Vav. Now, Aleph, Tav, automatically, that should trigger something, those of you who've been around here for a while. Because Yeshua most likely did not say, I'm the Alpha and Omega, but he probably said, Ani ha'Aleph v'Tav, I am the Aleph and the Tav, the first and last, beginning and the end, which is emblematic of what? The Word of God. So this word oto, it, that is referring to the blue cord. You shall look upon oto, and then you will remember. But here's what some of you may not know. The word oto, aleph, tav, vav, not only is it translated in the scripture as it, but many times it is translated as him, not H-E-M, H-I-M. You shall look upon him and remember. Even in Judaism, this is acknowledged, that the blue cord is looking as if you were looking upon him. And so then we could render this translation, and you shall look upon him and remember and do. Everybody tracking with me here? Zechariah chapter 12, verse 10, and I will pour on the house of David and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and supplication. Then they will look on me whom they have pierced. Yes, they will mourn for him as one mourns for his only son, and grieve for him as one grieves for a firstborn. The word look in this verse, it means to gaze intently, to focus on, with the idea of perceiving something. They're going to gaze on me whom they have pierced. So the pierced one in Zechariah's prophecy is the one that they are to look intently upon, to perceive something by looking and gazing upon him very intently. I did not tell Melody what I was going to talk about, but when she started praying about gazing into his eyes, the hair on the back of my neck started standing up. because that seems to be what he was wanting to get across today. That you and I need to be of a mind and heart to gaze into his eyes, to lock eyes with him, and do not get fixated on all this other stuff, because all these other things, if that's what we're emphasizing and focusing on in our life, I guarantee you that doubt will creep in. If all you're looking at is all this stuff on the news, I guarantee you that fear will try to creep in. We have to keep our eyes locked on him. I know that has been used to the point that it's almost cliche, but I guarantee you in the days, the weeks, the months, years ahead, as things continue to unravel in this world, you will come to understand what it really means to gaze upon him, to fix your eyes upon him, to keep your focus on him. Because if you don't, you're not going to make it. If I don't, I'm not going to make it. We're going to have to keep our eyes upon him. So the pierced one in Zechariah's prophecy is the one that we're to look very intently upon, with the idea of perceiving something. What we are to perceive is that Yeshua is the pierced one. And if the pierced one is this one we are to gaze intently on, I'm going to argue that Yeshua is the him in the command regarding the tzitzit. That blue cord. Because remember, it's more important to consider function over form, right? It's symbolism, it's emblematic, but in reality, who are we to focus on? A blue cord, or what that blue cord represents, or who that blue cord represents. And so if Yeshua is the him in this particular command, we focus on him and we remember to do these things. But what if the him isn't there? What if it's not there? Even if we have the blue cord to peer upon, are we focusing on him? That's really the question here. So here's my point. Yeshua is the focus. We know this. I'm just coming at it from a different angle perhaps, but we know. But need to always be reminded that Yeshua is always going to need to be our focus and what we are going to keep our eyes on, because he's the reason we do what we do. And without him as our focal point, things like tzitzit mean nothing. It's just thread. If he's not our focal point, then this Bible that we carry around with us, it really doesn't mean anything. It's just ink on paper. Unless he's the focal point, unless it is transforming our lives, unless it provokes us to get our eyes fixed on him. So when people see your tzitzit, if you wear tzitzit or you wear them outwardly, when they see your tzitzit, do they see a faithful representation of the Messiah? Or do they see strings hanging off your belt loop? Or do they see the fringes coming out from under your shirt if you wear a talit katan? The most important thing here is, do they see a faithful representation of the Messiah in your life? If they don't see your tzitzit, do they see Yeshua in your life? Do they see a faithful representation of the Messiah by how you act, what you do, what you don't do, what you say, what you don't say? That's the point. If we're going to represent him, let's represent him well. If we're going to represent him in this world, let's represent him in an authentic way. One that is always proclaiming that he is why we exist. That he is the reason that we are here. This Torah portion begins and it ends with the idea of seeing something and perceiving something. On one hand, as it begins, we see giants, we see fortified cities, and we conclude that they're stronger than we are and we can't do what God has told us to do. And that demonstrates that we were led by our hearts and our own eyes, doing what was right in our own eyes. And the other is to emphasize that we are to bring our heart and our eyes into submission to His will. Because when we do that, and we see Him, then others will see Him in our lives. So I want to close with this passage from Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1, one that I refer to very often. But it says, "Therefore we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us." You know, when we think of the sin that so easily ensnares us, it may mean different things to different people. And I would imagine that for a lot of people, we think of the big ones, the big obvious ones. You know, murder, stealing, all those kinds of things. But think of it in this context, what the 10 spies did to God's purpose and what the 10 spies did to His people. Because they were so easily ensnared by what they saw that they allowed what they saw to disregard what they had heard God say. So think of it in that way. Let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking unto Yeshua, the author, the Aleph, and the finisher, the Tav, of our faith, who for the joy that was set before Him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down on the right hand of the throne of God. The one we are to focus upon is to remind us of what we have heard from God and to do what we have heard from God. So consequently, if we keep our eyes on Him, we will do what we've been told. We will. In spite of the giants, in spite of the fortified cities, in spite of executive orders, in spite of this crisis, and in spite of computer hacks, in spite of these threats and the wars and the rumors of wars and all the things that Messiah must certainly happen. But He also said, before the end comes, the gospel of this kingdom will be preached to all the nations. And how's that going to happen? Who's going to carry that message? Those that have their eyes fixed on Him. Because if they have their eyes on Him, they'll do what He's told them to do. And they'll go where He tells them to go. And they'll do it knowing that He goes before them. And that there's no reason to fear a man or mankind or anything that man can do. So then, we need to remind ourselves that we will fear the one we revere. We will fear the one that we peer upon. And so we all need to ask ourselves, who do I fear? What do I fear? And we need to be honest with ourselves. Do we fear a person? Is there a person in this world that causes us to fear and keeps us from doing what we know we need to do because we're fearful of that person? Or is there a group of people that we're afraid of or intimidated by, and because of what they think or what they might say keeps us from doing what we know in our heart we need to do? Or is there a policy out there that keeps us intimidated and fearful of what I might have to deal with if I take a stand for what's right? My past? What is it? What do we fear? Are we going to fear the giants, or are we going to fear the captain of the Lord's host who says, I'm going before you. You just follow me. Amen? Father, we thank you for this day that you've given us. I thank you for your words. I thank you for your instruction. I thank you for the inspiration that your word gives. I thank you, Father, that we were once more reminded that even when we don't see you, you're working. And even when it seems that the enemy has surrounded us, we are surrounded by you. May it always be, Father, that we are surrounded by you, that even as you are in our midst, that we are in the midst of you. I thank you for the inspiration and the comfort, the encouragement and yes, the challenge that is presented to us in your word. Father, I pray that you will give us all the courage that we need for this day. And I pray, Father, that you will give us all and impart to us all that same spirit that was given to Caleb, whose mind and heart was that we can do what the Father has told us to do. We don't need to fear these people. We don't need to fear this situation, to not be intimidated by these things. As we continue on our journey and you allow circumstances that provoke us to divest ourselves of those things and those institutions and those industries and those individuals that we've placed our trust and confidence in times past. As we divest ourselves of that, may we always invest our confidence and trust and hope in you. Father, help us each and every day to learn in greater measure what it truly means to look unto Yeshua, the author and the finisher of our faith. To know what it truly means to keep our eyes fixed on you, to keep our gaze upon you, to look into the eyes of the lover of our soul, and to know that we can do all things through the Messiah who strengthens us, but we must keep our eyes on him. And I pray as brothers and sisters that we will always be of a mind and heart to encourage one another, to uphold the one who's faltering, who's struggling, to encourage them to continue on. Father, help us to always have a mind and heart that looks to restoration and redemption, and not to return to our bonds, not to return to our slavery, but to know that in you we are a free and liberated people, that in you there is salvation. Father, I pray for everyone who's part of this assembly here and those who are watching us on the live stream, those that, if there's anything that was said today that is resonating in their heart, I pray, Father, that while the word is there, that it will germinate and it will bear fruit. And do not allow the adversary to come and snatch up the seed that has been sown in the hearts and the minds of your people today. Breathe upon your word, breathe upon your message that you placed in their hearts and in their spirit. And Father, may it bring forth much fruit. These things we'll commit unto you in Yeshua's name. Amen.